Good morning, this is Dr. Turner with Fundamental Mathematics. Today we're going to be getting into Unit 9. Unit 9, we're going to start with 9.1, which is just looking at exponents, what exponents are. And a lot of you may be familiar with this. If so, that's great. If not, you learned something new, also great. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it with 9.1. So in 9.1, we are starting out with just exponents in general. And usually when we're looking at an exponential expression, we're used to seeing something like a to the b, or it could be x to a certain power, or it could be a number to a certain power, right? So we're used to thinking of these entire expressions as exponents, where in fact, these are actually referred to as powers. When I take a power, let's say a to the b, we have two elements here. The first is the larger number, which is at the bottom, which we refer to as a base. And then the little number up top, this is actually what the exponent is this number here. Some books will refer to that as an index or the plural indices. And it's this whole expression. It's this whole expression that is actually a power. So the whole thing is a power. And then you have the base, and then that's raised to an exponent is how this works, okay? So all that in mind, you are asked to, in just 9.1, be able to evaluate an exponent. Now that may seem a little basic, but a lot of students still struggle with the mechanics of this. So for instance, if I give you, let's say 5 to the second power, for instance, I still have a lot of students that'll tell me that's 10. Just like multiplication is repeated addition, exponents are repeated multiplication. So if I ask you 5 squared, that is not asking you 5 times 2, but rather it's asking you 5 times itself that many times. So 5 squared would be 5 times 5. And then you can evaluate the value for that, which would be 25 here. Okay. So when you're writing these out, let's look at another example. Let's say I have 2 to the third power. Okay. You have two different forms. The first is just exponential form. Okay. And if you were to write it out, 2 times 2 times 2, which is what 2 cubed is, this is what's referred to as expanded form. Now, both of these can be used to evaluate an exponent. We're going to be getting into some rules of evaluating exponential expressions. We're going to just look at one at a time. Now, if you are still struggling with this, sometimes it might help to write it out in expanded form before you evaluate it. You don't have to do that, but it's an option that might help. Either way, I'm doing 2 to the third power, or 2 times 2 times 2, which is going to give me 8. Okay. A couple things to note. Some of these, obviously, we can do, hopefully, by hand. Sometimes there are going to be higher level exponents that we may need a calculator for. Depending on the calculator, or if you're using, if you are using a calculator, if you're using your phone or Desmos or something like that, most calculators are going to have an x squared button, and they'll also have an x cubed button. So for exponents that are raised to the second or third power, typically you're going to have a button that is there for squared and cubed. However, if you are asked to evaluate something that is higher than that, let's say I ask you a 3 to the fourth power, for instance, well, then these buttons aren't going to work. So depending on the calculator, and if you have specific questions, we can go over it during office hours or in class. Some calculators are going to have a button that says x to the y. And so what you would do, let's say I wanted to evaluate this, I would put 3, and then I would hit that x to the y button on my calculator, and then type in the 4, then hit equals, and that'll generate the answer, which in this case is 81. And you can get that by doing expanded form as well. Other calculators will have what's known as a caret key. So if you're looking at a standard keyboard, above your number 6 on your keyboard, at the top, is what's known as the caret key. So to get that caret, you have to hit shift and then the number 6. Also on some calculators, you'll have the caret key. So if I wanted to evaluate 3 to the 4th power using one of those methods, then it would be 3, then the caret key, and then 4th power. Okay. So it's going to be a little different based on which calculator you're using. Now, in a standard algebra class, typically for exponents, you're not going to have anything too bad. If you look at a multiplication table, and I won't write the whole thing out here, but there is one in supplemental resources, all the way down to, let's say, 20, and then going the other way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 20. If you're looking at a multiplication table, you have the squares already along the main diagonal. 1 squared, or 1 times 1 is 1. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. 5 squared is 25. All the way down to 20 squared, which is 400. Now, I would say in fundamentals up to maybe algebra 1 or integrated math 1, you should be able to do a number times itself up to, let's say, 12, or preferably up to 15. By the time you're in integrated math 2 or algebra 2, you should be able to do up to 20 squared memorized. So if you need it, either under supplemental resources, or you can Google it, just look for a 20 by 20 multiplication table, and all the squares are down along that main diagonal. Beyond an exponent raised to the 2nd power, there are going to be some 3rd powers or cubed or 4th powers thrown in, like we did here, 2 cubed, 3 to the 4th power. Beyond that, if you have something that is higher than 4th degree, so higher than a 4th power, typically you're either going to be looking at base 2s or base 10s. So, and I'll skip 2 for a second. Base 10 is a fair game because, as we've mentioned in units 8 and 7, if you're multiplying or dividing by 10, you're just either adding a 0 or taking off a 0. Really, you're just moving the decimal place. So even if I did, let's say, 10 to the 7th power, I take 10 and I move the decimal to the right, which means I'm adding in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 zeros, right? So I don't need to do the expanded form for that. And I always like to go from the end and work my way back, put in the commas so it's a little bit more readable. So anything higher than a 4, typically it's going to be 10 or 2 to some power. With 2, that's also fair game, because with 2s, you're just doubling. And you could write it out in expanded form, but let's say I did 2 to the 6th power, or even something higher. Let's say I did 2 to the 10th power. You're just doing 2 times 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 2. And again, if you need the calculator, you can do that, but that ends up being 1024. Okay, so those are all the basics for your exponents. Okay, so that's going to be it for today. If you guys have any questions, please reach out to me. Otherwise, have a good day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.